The evening of Tuesday, November 19, 2024, in the quiet, affluent corridors of Perth, appeared to be nothing more than a routine conclusion to a workday. For one 31-year-old man, the evening's agenda seemingly involved nothing more complex than a standard post-work fitness session. As he stepped out of his local gym, the cool night air was his only companion until the shadows moved. In a coordinated, swift maneuver, law enforcement officers intercepted the individual, bringing a sudden, silent end to a life of carefully curated opulence. This was not a random street encounter. It was the clinical execution of a long-term strategic investigation, and the beginning of a revelation that would stun the Western Australian community. The following morning, the investigation moved from the pavement to the ivory towers. Authorities executed a search warrant on a high-end apartment located in Mount Pleasant, one of the most prestigious riverside suburbs in the region. What they discovered inside was a stark departure from the typical domestic setting. The residence was a monument to excess, housing a collection of designer fashion and high-value assets that seemed wildly disproportionate to any traditional career path. Parked within the complex were two Lamborghinis, symbols of ultimate status, alongside over $1 million worth of luxury items. For the investigators, these weren't just trophies of wealth. They were physical manifestations of a much darker, underlying economy. Detective Senior Sergeant Andy Baker would later note the stark contrast between this individual's lifestyle and the reality of the hardworking public. While the average citizen navigated a challenging economic landscape, this syndicate was allegedly thriving on a scale that felt fundamentally unjust. However, the raid was about more than just seizing Italian supercars and luxury apparel. It was about dismantling the infrastructure of a sophisticated operation that police believe moved $8 million in less than 2 months. The man leaving the gym wasn't just a fitness enthusiast. Authorities allege he was a pivotal node in a vast interstate network, serving as a high-level operative for a criminal enterprise that stretched far beyond Australia's borders. This arrest was the first domino to fall in a case that transcends simple contraband. It is a narrative of hidden ledgers, encrypted messages, and a family legacy built on a commodity most people ignore. As the doors of the Mount Pleasant apartment were processed for evidence, a much larger picture began to emerge, involving a tobacco king pulling strings from the Middle East, and a calculated expansion strategy designed to monopolize an illicit market worth billions. The luxury was merely the mirage. The reality was a meticulously organized system of moving vast quantities of paper and plastic, fueled by a conflict that was about to turn incredibly intense. To understand the arrest of the individual in Perth, we must look thousands of miles away, beyond the Australian coastline and into the heart of Iraq. This is where the narrative takes a sharp turn from local crime into the realm of international orchestration. Investigators point to a central figure, Kaz Hammad, better known in the underworld as Kaz. In mid-2023, Kaz was deported from Australia to Iraq, a move many assumed would sever his ties to the lucrative domestic markets he once influenced. However, in the digital age, physical distance is often a mere technicality. Rather than fading into obscurity, authorities allege that Kaz used his exile to transform a local operation into a sprawling, multi-billion-dollar cartel. The psychology of an exiled kingpin is one of calculated resilience. From a remote base in the Middle East, Kaz allegedly continued to pull the strings of his organization with the precision of a grandmaster. This remote control model of organized crime relies on a foundation of absolute loyalty, often found within familial or long-standing associate circles. By placing trusted lieutenants in key Australian hubs, the architect can maintain a hands-off approach while reaping the rewards of high-stakes commerce. This wasn't just about selling a product. It was about establishing a monopoly. A 2024 intelligence report suggests the Hamad Syndicate evolved into a dominant force, utilizing a sophisticated network to control the importation and distribution of illicit goods across several states. The sheer scale of this alleged expansion is what caught the eye of the Lunar Task Force, a specialized unit dedicated to dismantling these specific trade routes. While Kaz remained physically out of reach of Australian law enforcement, his presence was felt in every transaction and every strategic move made on the ground. The move of his younger brother Maytham to Western Australia in 2022 is now viewed by investigators not as a personal relocation, but as a tactical positioning of a key asset. It was a westward expansion designed to tap into a fresh market, ensuring the family's reach extended from the established hubs of Melbourne and Sydney to the growing landscape of Perth. This international dynamic adds a layer of complexity that borders on espionage, There are even whispers within intelligence circles that the syndicate's activities may have intersected with foreign interests, elevating the case from a standard criminal investigation to a matter of national security. The alleged objective was clear: to build an impenetrable empire where the leadership is shielded by international borders, while the profits continue to flow back to the source. As the investigation deepened, it became evident that the individual leaving the gym in Perth was merely one piece of a global puzzle, a boots-on-the-ground representative for a shadow hierarchy operating from half a world away. The arrest in Perth was the culmination of a massive intelligence-gathering effort known as Operation Charger. This was not a simple case of street-level distribution. It was a deep dive into the sophisticated financial plumbing of a multi-state criminal enterprise. To understand how 8 million moves under the radar, one must look at the cash-only storefronts that served as the syndicate's primary engine. Investigators allege that Maytham Hamad oversaw a retail network spanning the Perth suburbs from Armidale to High Wycombe. These weren't just businesses. They were high-volume liquidity hubs, generating staggering amounts of physical currency every single day. However, having millions in cash creates a significant logistical problem. How do you move it across the country, and eventually overseas, without triggering a single red flag? The answer, according to police, was a blend of old-school tradecraft and modern encryption. The syndicate allegedly utilized a nominee account system, using third-party identities to mask the true ownership of funds. But the most audacious part of the operation involved the Australian postal system. Between August and September of 2024 alone, authorities tracked 45 separate parcels sent from Western Australia to Victoria. Each package was a brick of currency, containing between 155,000 and 220,000 in physical cash. The digital footprint of this operation was equally complex. Detectives believe the syndicate relied heavily on encrypted messaging platforms to coordinate these shipments, creating a virtual command and control center that bypassed traditional surveillance. During the investigation, police managed to intercept 9 additional packages, seizing approximately 1.7 million before it could vanish into the network. This was the paper trail that led straight back to the upper echelons of the organization. Each intercepted parcel provided a data point, allowing the joint task force between Western Australia and Victoria Police to map out the entire infrastructure of the Hamad family's alleged financial empire. The objective of this elaborate transit system was singular: to funnel the proceeds of the illicit trade back to Kaz Hammad in the Middle East. By moving the money through a labyrinth of postal routes and nominee accounts, the syndicate hoped to make the funds clean enough to sustain a lavish lifestyle, while simultaneously funding further expansion. For the investigators of Operation Charger, the challenge was to prove that the designer clothes and the Lamborghinis in Mount Pleasant weren't just the result of good fortune, but the direct product of an 8 million interstate laundering machine designed to keep an exiled kingpin in power. While the financial investigation traced the flow of millions, a much louder and more dangerous conflict was manifesting in the streets. This was the Tobacco Wara period of intense volatility that transformed commercial districts into zones of high-stakes territorial disputes. Between July and August of 2024, the city of Perth experienced a sudden and severe spike in unrest. Within a single month, 11 separate incidents of arson and firearm activity were reported, all linked to the same illicit trade. The conflict that had long plagued Melbourne had officially migrated west, as different factions fought for control over a multi-billion-dollar monopoly. The strategy behind this scorched earth approach was simple: intimidation. Investigators believe that when the Hamad syndicate attempted to expand its footprint in Western Australia, it met resistance from existing operators. The resulting fallout was a series of targeted acts designed to eliminate competition and force compliance. Businesses were set ablaze in the middle of the night, and storefronts were riddled with evidence of intense hostility. One particularly chilling incident in October saw a masked individual captured on security footage breaking into a Midlands store shortly before it was engulfed in flames. For the public, these weren't just business disputes. They were threats to the safety of the entire community. The human cost of this conflict reached a heartbreaking nadir in Melbourne, where the wrong house was targeted by individuals allegedly linked to these wider disputes. A 27-year-old woman, completely uninvolved in the criminal underworld, lost her life when an arson attack was carried out on the incorrect address. This tragedy shifted the narrative from organized crime to a matter of public safety. It highlighted the utter disregard for human life inherent in these territorial battles. While the primary suspects in the financial wing of the syndicate, including Maytham Hamad, not directly accused of carrying out these violent acts themselves, police argue that the violence is an inseparable byproduct of the illicit market they allegedly dominate. Western Australia's Police Commissioner, Colonel Blanche, made it clear that law enforcement viewed these acts of arson and damage as a strategic expansion effort orchestrated from afar. The Tobacco War was not a random series of events. It was a coordinated campaign to ensure that every storefront in the region operated under the Syndicate's shadow. As investigators sifted through the wreckage of firebomb shops, they weren't just looking for accelerants, they were looking for the link between the violence in the streets and the luxury in the voyage. Riverside apartments. The two worlds were connected by a single, dark thread, the pursuit of total market control at any cost. As the sun rose over the Perth Magistrates Court following the high-stakes raids, the focus shifted from the tactical to the judicial. Maytham Hamad stood before the court, facing a series of grave allegations that could dismantle the very empire his family worked to build. The primary charge, knowingly dealing with the proceeds of crime exceeding $1 million, is just the tip of the iceberg. Perhaps more concerning for the defense was the revelation that at the time of this arrest, the individual was already out on bail for 9 prior charges involving illicit trade and financial misconduct across remote regions like South Headland and Kalgoorlie. This pattern of behavior painted a picture for the prosecution of a systematic, relentless operation that refused to halt even under the scrutiny of the law. The courtroom drama took a secretive turn, as defense attorneys lobbied for parts of the bail hearing to be conducted behind closed doors. Their arguments centered on the sensitivity of the evidence, but prosecutors countered with a different concern: public testimony could compromise the ongoing delicate work of Operation Charger. There is a sense among investigators that they have only scratched the surface of the encrypted communication devices seized during the raids. These digital black boxes likely contain the blueprints for future shipments, the names of silent partners, and perhaps direct directives from the architect in exile himself. As it stands, the legal battle is a stalemate of high-stakes maneuvering. The prosecution is fighting to keep the key evidence shielded from the public to protect the integrity of a nationwide investigation, while the defense seeks to navigate a path toward freedom for a man who, until recently, lived a life of unchecked luxury. Meanwhile, the broader implications of this case continue to ripple through the Australian law enforcement community. Victoria Police Assistant Commissioner Martin O'Brien underscored the reality that this was never just about tobacco. These illicit networks provide the financial and logistical skeleton for much darker enterprises, including the movement of weapons and prohibited substances. The story of the Hamad Syndicate is far from a closed chapter. With the next court date set for early December, the authorities are racing against time to decrypt the remaining data and trace the final destination of the missing millions. While the Lamborghinis have been towed and the Mount Pleasant apartment stands empty, the tobacco war remains a volatile undercurrent in Australian society. The arrest of a key lieutenant is a significant victory, but as long as the leadership remains in a distant land, the shadow of the empire continues to loom. The question now isn't just about the verdict for one man, but whether the law can finally sever the invisible threads that connected Jim in Perth to the heart of the Middle East.